Welcome to the Making College Affordable podcast with me, Jason Fleury, certified financial planner professional and college planning specialist. I'm about to show you the inside secrets colleges don't want you to know and help you become a more educated consumer when it comes to paying for college. I believe you should enjoy the journey of allowing your kids to pursue their dreams without having to sacrifice yours. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do. So let's get started. Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to the Making College Affordable podcast. This is episode number 18, and I'm still Jason Fleury. Thrilled to share with you the game-changing experiences and expertise that I've learned over the past 20 plus years as a certified financial planner professional and college planning specialist. Now, in the last episode, we talked about financial aid, and I taught you about the federal method and primarily the FAFSA form. We're going to keep talking about financial aid today, but I'm going to talk about the institutional method, and primarily that's done with a form called the CSS Profile. The CSS Profile is something that's organized by the College Board, so you would log in using the same login information that your kids set up to register for the PSAT or the SAT. Not everybody asks for this form, but for those colleges who do, they tend to be some of the most generous colleges that are out there anywhere. So you definitely want to check to see if your college is going to require the CSS Profile before you sign up and start trying to complete it. I mentioned last time that the FAFSA is complicated, that it has about 100 to 120 questions or so on it with a lot of financial information. Well, the CSS Profile has all of those questions plus a whole lot more. And it's much more invasive than the FAFSA was. So a lot of those areas they didn't ask you about in the federal method, they will ask you about here. This is going to include areas like your retirement balances. They can't do anything about it, but they're just nosy. They'll ask about the value of your business. They'll also ask about your home equity. And they can use the valuation of your business and your home equity against you in this formula. Colleges that use the CSS Profile will ask you what cars you drive. They'll ask you where you go to church. They'll ask you what memberships you have and how much you pay in dues. They'll ask you all kinds of questions that are not a part of the federal formula. And there's a large student section on the CSS Profile that you have to be aware of also. See, in all these financial aid forms, they're written for the students to complete. Now, I don't know who would ever let their kids complete these forms by themselves, but that's the way the forms are written. So you get started and it says you, and you're putting in all of your information, and then you get a little deeper into it and it says now, for your parents, enter this information. So it's very common to have to go back and undo or redo a lot of the information that you may have entered early on because you didn't realize that it was talking to the student and not to you as a parent. But they do have a large student section on the CSS Profile. And there are some wonderful questions there like, how much can your parents afford to send you to college? Now, it's not exactly written that way, but it's basically the same question. And you should have done some homework to determine what your ballpark expected family contribution is going to be, and I would suggest trying to put a number that's reasonably close to that number in that section that asks what your ability to pay for college is. But here's a question everybody loves. The very next question on the form says, how much do grandparents, aunts and uncles, and other relatives expect to pay for your college? What should that answer be? That's right, it should be zero, because they're not a part of your household. And if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've learned about expected family contribution and how it's based exclusively on your household. If you have someone outside of your household that's going to help you pay for college, disclosing that information is not going to do anything to reduce your expected family contribution. And I've seen more than a few times that when colleges see that you have outside resources, they reduce the amount of financial aid that they offer you, which could cost you big time. You only have to report things that are in your household. So as you're going through the student section, and as you're going through the parent section, you have to be very careful and consistent as you answer these questions. For example, as you get to the part about your home equity, a lot of people are really proud of where they live and the value of their home. But don't let that pride hurt you when you're completing financial aid forms. Whenever possible, we use the tax assessor's information of what the county says that a family's home is worth. And then we're going to include the principal and interest plus the escrows into the mortgage payment. They're going to ask how much you owe on your home, so if you have a first mortgage and an equity line or maybe even a second mortgage, be sure to include all of that. They're not going to take 100% of your equity and put it back into the formula, but they can take a certain percentage. And you want to show the lowest valuation on your house with as much debt on it as you can to minimize that amount of equity that's available. The other area where your pride can hurt you is in the valuation of your business. If you're self-employed and you're trying to build a business that you'll eventually be able to sell, don't get too carried away with the current valuation of that business. Remember in the federal formula that if you own at least 50% of it and you employ less than 100 people, the valuation of your business is completely excluded. And I'm sure that if you had enough time, you could probably really tidy things up with your business and put it on the market and find a buyer who would pay you top dollar for everything that you've worked for. But that's not the number that we're looking for right here on the CSS profile. If you had to sell your business in the next, say, 30 to 60 days, what would it be worth then? Would you even be able to get a buyer in that short amount of time? Look at valuations like that. We can report fire sale prices on the CSS profile because in most cases, especially if it's your primary source of income, you're not going to be required to liquidate or take the value of your business into consideration to pay for your kids to go to college. That's something that may have to be negotiated with the college down the road, but report as conservative of a number as you honestly can and do the same thing with your house just so that you don't overstate your ability to pay on this form. You know, if you haven't realized it yet, when you get to this point in the college planning process, it's usually pretty easy to see that the colleges are businesses and you're their customer. And that financial aid officer who has financial aid in his title or her title, you begin to realize that their primary job is not to give you financial aid. Their primary job is to look through all of this information that you're providing to them to determine what they think you can afford, and then they suggest ways for you to pay their bill. It's not that they're really that interested in your property or your business or your home. What they're most interested in is cash. And they want to take that cash from anywhere they can find it and suggest that you use it to pay for your kids to go to college. If you were the financial aid officer and you worked for the company the way that they do, wouldn't you do the same thing? Well, of course. But when you're not in their shoes, you want to protect your assets as best you can, and these strategies that I've given you here are certainly proven ways to do it. The last thing I want to tell you about the CSS profile for now is that while you can go in on the FAFSA form and amend it online, you can't amend the CSS profile online. If you make mistakes, you have to print the form off, mark it up with whatever corrections are needed, and then send it individually to each college on the list. With FAFSA, when you make a change, it goes to all of the colleges that you've attached to it. With the CSS profile, each college can only see the information that you've submitted to them directly. So if you make a change, you have to notify them individually. Because this form is so much more complicated and so much longer than the FAFSA, it's pretty easy to make mistakes. And when we print a copy of the CSS profile, it's sometimes 17 to 19 pages long. So do your best to make sure that you get it correct the first time, because correcting mistakes is not detrimental to your ability to get money for college. It's just a paperwork nightmare and a huge drain of your time. And speaking of that, it sounds like this form is so daunting and so overwhelming that maybe you should just pick schools that don't use the CSS profile altogether. Well, that would be a mistake, because the CSS profile schools tend to be some of the most generous colleges out there, and in many cases they not only meet 100% of your need, but they do it entirely with free money in the form of grants and scholarships. You just have to understand what the rules are and what questions are going to be on the test before you take the test. With some planning and the insight of a college planning specialist, you can drastically reduce your share of the college bill, ace the CSS profile, and get the maximum award possible. And the good thing about it is, unless your financial situation changes a lot from year to year, whatever you're awarded in the first year, it's highly likely that you'll be awarded something very similar in each additional year. And that can add up to a fortune if you've done things correctly. After you've submitted your financial aid forms, you may receive some requests for documentation, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. But for now, use these tips and strategies to make the CSS profile easier and more accurate, because it's not up to the college to make sure that you've done this correctly. You have to take responsibility for this yourself. But now, at least you have some ideas on how to get started. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, please feel free to let me know. I hope you've enjoyed and benefited from today's show. If you like what you've heard, please give us a good rating wherever you get your podcasts and share us with your friends. Also, if you have any specific questions or comments about anything we've covered today, email those questions to podcast@mycollegeplanners.com. You can also visit our website at mycollegeplanners.com to get personalized recommendations on how to make college more affordable and learn how working with a college planning specialist can improve your life. Thanks again for listening today. I look forward to seeing you again soon.